again, I'm really enjoying all of these conversations so far, and hopefully this next one will be as dynamic for you. I am so thrilled to be joined on stage by His Excellency. Your Excellency, welcome to the summit, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, and thank you as well, the IFC and His Excellency Sakadam, the team, Arif Amiri, and the team who's really bringing this together. Been shocking with the names and numbers that have been progressing year on year. 8,000 people expected to visit the Dubai FinTech in 2 days, and this is really phenomenal. What really FinTech and what Dubai is really doing.
Absolutely, and every time I come back to the FinTech Summit, it seems to get bigger and bigger. The conversation is becoming more dynamic, more expansive. So let's kick it off by just giving us a pulse check, first and foremost, on where we stand right now and the government's most recent efforts to develop and enable this sector.
I think, first of all, Dan, as well, I'm really happy to sit with you. It's my 4th time in a year, I think. You should be running out of questions. Well, I think this is a great opportunity as well to really take it on. I think where we look at where do we stand at the moment, in the UAE, with the last changes that happened in the last, let's say, COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 situation, the UAE did a really a huge turnaround on policies and laws and regulations that really were taboo to be spoken about in the past. One was the first one was the 100% ownership to companies in mainland. Now, all companies can really own companies 100% in mainland. This was done in September 2020, the year of COVID, which has really changed the kind of dimensions of how things are going. The second one, the aspects of criminalizations of bounced checks, for instance, in the commercial transaction law that we changed. Now, checks bounces at the moment is not criminal. Bankers doesn't like me for that, but I think this is something which really changed as well the mentality and the way the UAE really focus on. And from that as well, what we saw 275,000 new business license, and from 2022 from 2021 to 2022. We had a target which we promised to reach 1 million companies in the UAE. We are now at 800 something, and we're growing. In the past, before that law, it was about 500,000 or so, up to 600,000 companies. So we are really hitting the target with these changes of laws and regulations. And I think if we go back as well and see, for instance, the IFC and what they've done on the FinTech and the FinTech Hive and the World Cup on FinTech, I think this is something which is really, not to mention how financial technology become the absolute technology to go forward and invest in. I know the session before me was on AI, but I think financial technology is an aspect as well with the AI could really take forward as well a huge advancements in investments. I don't want to be noting any company here, but I think it's important to really take this forward. With that said, the UAE, we needed to diversify our economy. Now, our economy was mainly when we were hit with COVID-19 and these changes, we were about 15% aviation, let's say 10% tourism. We're about, that's about 25%. We go on to retail, but 5 to 6%. We go about real estate by 5%. COVID-19 took these bundle of 40-50% of our GDP and the world GDP to merely zero. Because of people couldn't travel, people couldn't use hotels. Retail was, trying to go and, who had an online platform, and financial technologies that then managed to really push their way through. So what happened to the economy is kind of, the world economy had a kind of rethinking of and reorganizing themselves sustainably to focus on the future. Now, as we're remembering, I think the objective was to recover, and then there was an objective to be sustainable in the next 10 years. Sustainability means new diversions for new economies. And financial technology is the most important one. Now, when we go to, for instance, Salat and E&, now, and I think this is something as well not to mention here, but they managed to change the way they're thinking, and they went to the and part of the E, and the and stands for so many things. Did you know that they do carbon accounting now for companies? With Internet of Things, with AI units and stuff, they can actually account for carbon, and you can report your carbon emissions, internationally. This is something which a telecom used to be just a telecom company. Now they're actually producing different services where the UAE and working with the EAN now is focusing to export such services globally. So the diversification of the economy and the way companies now think is more different and diverse of where we stand today. Now, from numbers-wise, yes, we with the geopolitics, trade, inflation, interest rates, all these swans that came up in the last year or two. I thought we're going to be happy, and after COVID-19, with all these COVID-19, jabs and stuff to really move away from it. But actually, all these black swans that came in, inflation went up, interest rate went up, geopolitics has happened between Russia and Ukraine, and now Israel and Gaza. But these things that today and the Red Sea as well, put the UAE in a way where we look for opportunity and agility. These policies that were set in place allowed us as well to rethink as well on the FATF situation. We were in the grey list on FATF, which is a big hurdle for the FinTech solutions as well. But we managed with the redesign, rework on the FATF aspects and we worked tirelessly for 2 years. And we got off the list. And I thank everyone in the room who really worked hard as well with us, understanding what FATF rules and regulations. Because no economy in the world would like to have, to be on a grey list or to be working with illicit money and laundering money and stuff. This is not an economy the UAE is known or representing for. And with us moving shows the commitment of the UAEs globally on combating illicit crime and illicit money laundering. And this is an aspect as well that we're going to focus on. Now, what's going to happen in our FATF agenda as well is that we're going to focus on complicated structures. We're going to look at as well taking more, into hands as well, criminals, working with international laws and working with international aspects with that.
So just on that topic in particular, I think when you look at the economic growth story of the region, it is one of growth, but it's also one of diversification. And that conversation is increasingly framed around a competition, for want of a better word, between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Is that necessarily fair to frame it in that way? And if so, how do you position this economy, this country, to effectively compete?
Well, I think if there is competition, I think the most important aspect is we all in the region are growing. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Bahrain, in the last 2 years, we were doing 7.9%. Saudi was doing 7.9% in GDP in 2022. We did 7.9% in GDP in 2022. 7.2% for the was non-oil GDP. Last year was a big year on inflation and interest rates, where there was a huge hike on that. We did a 5.9% in non-oil. And that's something which diversified the UAE's economy to 73% of non-oil GDP now in the UAE. And that's something never happened in history. And we want to grow that to 74%, 75% of non-oil GDP. Now, with that said, the competition really, if competition helps growth, then let's do it. I think that's something which is really good for all countries in the region and as well for the GCC.
You mentioned the UAE was also recently removed from the Financial Action Task Force grey list. Tell us a bit more about that work and how you've been strengthening the AML framework here to minimize some of the vulnerabilities, particularly in key sectors like real estate, for example.
Well, the thing is more about education and workshops with the real estate, understanding them. What is, how is the new technology of illicit crime comes with real estates. We did a huge work going down and really doing a huge workshop with the sector. We managed to train more than 10,000 people around the sector. We're still working with that. Education is important. Reporting as well on the AML systems by notifying that there is a challenge in that. So this is something which is an important aspect to really educate the sector. Now, if you ask me, did we find any criminals out there? Did we find people laundering? No, we found people who in the real estate sector who didn't know what the system works or operates. They didn't know that they had to have a person for the AML registered. They didn't know that if someone came in with 3, 4, 5 different types of payment for one apartment, they need to report it. This is kind of suspicious. So this reporting now, knowledge and understanding in the real estate sector becomes more and more understanding, and they started to understand what process they need to do and so forth. This is what really brought the AML and educating them out of it. And I think this is one thing that they really need to recognize, that the private sector we have in the UAE is highly educated. They're efficient, they're agile as well. And moving forward, they really want to adapt this. And we didn't have any pushback. We had actually a push forward to say, yeah, yes, we want to do this and more. And you see that the real estate today is really going up. And actually now the properties, when you buy a property in the UAE, you will go through, checks and balances and checks on verification, where the money comes in and so forth. This is where things are going in with it.
So what's your message to anyone who might be visiting the UAE, perhaps attending this summit for the very first time, who are looking to invest, maybe considering the UAE as a place to move, in terms of government regulation to encourage and develop innovation and address some of the challenges that they might have heard about in the media?
I think, first of all, buy a property. No. But no, I'm not doing the advertisement on any. But I'm just saying is that I think the most important aspect is the UAE always, put the innovation at the heart of what we're doing. We are one of the first countries in the world who announced there's a minister for AI. And I was sitting here listening to this session before this, where regulation of AI, for instance, is now the talk of the kind of conversation. Well, let me tell you, in 2018, we announced that we want to do a global AI council to regulate AI. No one attended. We had a minister of AI back now and then as well, and he pushed a lot, my colleague, His Excellency Umar al-Ulama, a lot to bring people to regulate the AI, and nobody actually gave it and today, the world in 2024, 6-7 years later, is talking about regulating AI. This shows you where the UAE is in the innovation and technology aspects. We've been discussing this 2018, 2019. That's where the world is. And with that, with the UAE standing on that innovation is important. Now we're adopting AI as well in the federal government, as well I think in the local government. There's a lot of technology and innovation coming in. And I think this is something which really changes the views, how the UAE positions itself. So UAE is kind of, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President, the Prime Minister and the ruler of Dubai always say, do not wait for opportunities, you have to create opportunities. That's the future that lies ahead.
So let's talk about the next wave of this growth. You were speaking about some of the numbers earlier. The UAE is going to need to grow at 7% annually to double GDP by 2031.
That's my kind of targets.
That's your own target,
yeah,
right?
That's my own personal target. Let's clear this out.
Right. So where do we stand on the growth outlook right now? And I think at last check, we were growing at what, around 2.5%, 3%?
Right.
So how do you get to the 7?
So the IMF, the World Bank, they say we're going to grow at 4.2%. Maybe we do 4.9 on non-oil GDP. I want to do 7%, but that's not the case. But let's talk about the Purchasing Manager Index, for instance, the PMI. It reached 56.6 in January 2024. This is really an index that I really keep an eye on it. It shows the growth coming in the first quarter. When I said I want 7%, oh, by the way, I say 7% every year. And a year I get it, a year I don't. So it depends on the economy and what really is happening, global economy, and what swans that comes up. But I think this year we're looking at, from a 4 to 5%, maybe 5+% GDP growth, and I think that's something which we are, eyeing on. I think that's really great. But what really is important for me is the non-oil GDP growth. That's where we need to see the growth in. I think that's about 4.9%. But if we push that, that will grow us away from oil, and will grow our non-oil GDP from 73% at least to 74%, 75% in the next couple of years, will help us to diversify away from oil. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the President of the UAE, if you recall back as well, maybe 7-8 years ago, when he started at the World Government Summit, and he said, the famous speech saying that we're going to export our last barrel of oil in 2050. Well, the UAE took that, and went and said, yes, so we need to diversify. What does it mean? We need to have a diversification agenda on our strategies. And moving away from oil means that we need to go into FinTech, we need to go into technology, health tech, edutech. So whatever tech comes in, as a technology that will diversify the way we think and the way we take things forward, and that's where we want to grow. Now, where do we see the growth? We see growth away from the kind of traditional economy, so it's real estate, tourism. Well, we see growth in tourism, but something away. But for instance, new types of tourism, such as sustainable tourism, such as ecotourism, for instance. We're looking at growth into health tech. There's a lot of technology coming around health. We're looking into AI, generative AI as well. And thus, the UAE is becoming a capital for AI, building in the world. And this is something shows where innovation at the heart of this.
I think one thing that's also been really impressive is just how fast moving your ministry and the government has been in the aftermath of unforeseen events like the floods, for example. Significant damage to property, significant damage to infrastructure.
I expected that question.
Right, yeah, I assume so. But business disruptions as well. So I just wanted to talk about this quickly. Can we quantify yet the economic losses as a result of the flood, and how closely have you been watching the economic recovery off the back of this?
Well, I think with the challenges that really the flood came in, I think it stopped working for us for 2 to 3 days. But I think that's not really the law. I think the trust that the people had, the private sector trust that they had with the government, with the infrastructure in the UAE, really is a remarkable, an astonishing way to see how businesses came back to business very quick off. And I think this is something which was amazing. We've seen notification that the government will work remotely. Schools goes remotely. The infrastructure for going remotely by decision taken 24 hours, no country can do that. If you're anywhere in the world and say, well, tomorrow is going to be remote, and you don't have the right infrastructure from the right telecom connections, from the right 5G, from the right aspect, you cannot. So business was doing business. In our Ministry of Economy, for instance, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, 4 years ago said, I want 50% of all services in the government to be online. In the Ministry of Economy, we said 100%. And that will happen 4 years ago. In our ministry, we provide services 100% online. No need for you to come in. And that's something which shows that the UAE can really push forward the technology and the way forward in doing so. Now, I don't think there's a huge amount of losses happen, maybe a little bit on infrastructure, and that's something that UAEs and Dubai could really work around. But I think businesses manage to do business from wherever they are. I think an aspect of that taking in, it really pushes as well for more businesses to come in because they have a trust in the way that the works in, the technology, the high-speed internet that we have, and working remotely from anywhere you want in the UAE.
So how is the government supporting businesses off the back of this, particularly those that were most impacted, like SMEs, for example?
Well, I think there's a lot of on the local government support. There's something on the banking sector. I was reading the other day on the newspaper, a little bit on the aspects of insurances. So there's a little bit of support here and there what's happening, but not huge that says it's really affected. The UAE's economy and will stop me from growing on 7%. Are you hunting on that now? We should all do 7%. That's your target, everyone. And I think that's something we need to push forward.
Look, just one more question on the floods, though. I think, one thing it did expose, and this is, I think, an absolutely fair question. I think it did expose the vulnerabilities of Dubai's infrastructure. So how do you address that in the future?
Well, it exposed probably the emergency plans, because nobody expected such amount of rainfall to come in one day, in few hours. So everyone was ready, everyone had a plan into it, everybody expected the rain to come in, but the amount of rain, there's no country, no city out there could really handle in 10 hours. And I think with that, what we saw from the Dubai police, we saw from the civil defense, what we saw from the teams out there really took a great job. And we need to applaud them on the amount of work that they have done and really thank them for really putting the business back on track.
Absolutely. Okay, so final question for you, Your Excellency.
On climate change now.
We'll give you the final question. So I know you have to get back to work. So look, I wanted to ask you specifically about what happens next from here. And you mentioned some of the vulnerabilities that you're watching. The global economy facing headwinds from inflation to higher for longer interest rates. You mentioned geopolitical tensions, of course, also weighing on the outlook here. So what is the most significant challenge that you and your team are focused on solving right here, right now?
I think that needs more than 30 seconds on the screen. But let me explain about something, which is the global challenge of climate change. UAE hosted COP28 back in November. And what the UAE has done to the world is we brought everyone to one room, oil producers, companies, NGOs together and really committing to the world where we're going to take the climate change and the decarbonization. Now, the challenge is that UAE, and I'll talk about the challenge and I'll give you the opportunity. So the challenge is UAE emits about 0.63% of the global GHG emissions. And when we put it per capita, we might be number 1 or 2 in the world. But 0.63% of GHG emissions are it's not hard challenge for the UAE's leadership to take it down compared to India, China doing about 15–20% of GHG emissions globally. So the question is, the opportunity is, the UAE, how can the UAE really help the world to decarbonize? So the global challenge is a decarbonized economy. Everyone needs to decarbonize the economy. So the UAE can play a big opportunity in the decarbonization aspect and decarbonize the economy. So what we're working on is we're working on a green growth strategy on the supply side on 4 major aspects. Number 1, we're focusing on creating green industrial zones, producing green products for the world. Second one is green IP, green intellectual properties. How do we have a frame for green IPs and strategize on that? The third one, which is important, is how do we export our know-how on green, such as, for instance, and doing carbon accounting and exporting that service globally. How can we help the world to really calculate their carbon and decarbonize? And the fourth one, which is very important, the critical minerals. The critical minerals are 4 things. This is nickel, cobalt, lithium, and copper. These are the productions of the solar panels, the batteries that we need to go renewable. Right. UAE doesn't have a single bauxite mine, but we are the major producer of aluminum globally. UAE doesn't have a gold mine, but we are the center for gold producing around the world. We can really help these critical minerals to be placed in the green industrial zones, for instance, and produce green copper, green lithium that is processed for it to be used in green growth. So the challenge that the world is going to face is the decarbonization of economies, specifically in areas where, in Africa and East Asia, where we can really play a role in helping the world to decarbonize. 0.63 of GHG emissions is not a huge percentage compared to the per capita, but we can take that down easily. But we can help the world as well to decarbonize globally.
Your Excellency, we'll leave it there. Food for thought. Always appreciate the conversation, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, always.